Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Lord Mayor. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for coming. We hope we don't disappoint. First of all, just a bit about us and how we work and how tonight might run. We're married, we have 3 children, and we work together, which some would say would be madness. We don't necessarily always sing from the same hymn book, but we do tonight, hopefully. But we definitely finish one another's sentences. It's often like a veritable game of ping pong, both at home and at work. And I think tonight's speech, the form of tonight's speech, will probably reflect a little bit of a microcosm of that.
It will. But let's start by defining and introducing a few key concepts and provocations.
Well, the first and most important is both provocation and disclaimer. The entire content of this speech is anecdotal, personal, and in many cases it's unfounded on anything other than our combined experience and opinions. It's what we like, it's what we believe in, and it's what we hope for. They're propositions, really, nothing more.
But to the basics, what is a city?
An urban settlement with a cathedral, perhaps?
A settlement where the number and density of the population greatly facilitates interaction between business and people.
Was it Italo Calvino that said that a city is a place that's always being built, and that in fact when a city stops changing and being changed, it becomes a ruin?
When something is everywhere and just is, like, for example, the existence of cities around the globe, it's easy to forget to ask what defines this thing we call a city. What's fundamental to the makeup of a typical city? In the 1950s, the archaeologist and historian Gordon Childe proposed 10 metrics for upgrading an ancient settlement to an ancient city.
Firstly, size and density of population above normal.
Differentiation of the population. Not all residents grow their own food, which can allow for specialisation and deeper engagement in trades.
Payment of taxes to a deity or ruler.
Monumental public buildings.
Those not producing their own food are supported by the ruler.
Systems of recording and practical science.
System of writing.
Development of symbolic art.
Trade and import of raw materials.
Specialist craftsmen from outside the kin group.
Now, it's interesting to see how much still stands today for defining our cities. Taxes, unsurprisingly. Numbers of people, inevitably. Immigration's up there at number 10, and a vibrant mix of trades and professions, of course. But what we found interesting for tonight's talk was that the other 5 of the 10 measurements,
fully half the defining factors,
half, are all related to the centrality of arts and culture in any definition of an ancient city. So let's assume in point number 5, for example, that by not producing their own food, Childe means having no practical means of generating an income for themselves. Now, in ancient times, that would no doubt would have included a priestly caste, but also, most pertinently to tonight, the artists, the scientists, and the keepers of records.
And in point number 4, who erected those monumental public buildings?
Well, slaves, probably.
True. But who footed the monumental bill? The deity or ruler? And what did he, she, or it use to pay? Those taxes collected in point number 3. Quite simply, we can see by this rudimentary and we think pretty uncontroversial set of metrics that a thriving, functioning, significant city invests heavily in art, culture and science, as it constitutes, according to Gordon Childe anyway, 50% of its identifying presence in the historical record.
So now to our precinct, Walsh Bay.
That's it there, in case you don't know it. But first, before we go there actually, let's look at some of the other terms that we've talked about tonight. Creative, vibrant and sustainable.
Well, creative is actually quite a strange word. It's bandied around, it seems to have no definable parameters, and yet it's hoarded away from so many occupations and professions, as if it doesn't really manifest in all our lives. Blandly, it's the artists who are considered creative. Adventure is creative, holidays, Apple Macs. Business is not, IBM is not, daily life is not. And these demarcations, of course, are rubbish. I mean, life herself is inherently creative. Human beings, particularly, are inventive, resourceful, ingenious corner cutters and opportunity maximisers. I mean, winches, anyone? Pumps, wheels, fire. Our species is marked by the ability to create and the urge to create. Creativity flows like water through our lives. Metaphor, for example, is an act of creativity, and water is a good metaphor for creativity. Water flows, water is vital, water destroys and makes anew. Water replenishes, it quenches, water makes things grow. Like water, creativity faces three great obstacles. They are evaporation, stagnation and containment. So firstly, evaporation of the creative juice comes from over-scrutinisation, too much need to explain and deal with the glaring heat of the rational. Stagnation comes with lack of replenishment. Creativity is its own reward, absolutely, but by its nature it must move, it must flow, and it must stay active. And finally, containment, the dam that inhibits creativity, is habit. T.S. Eliot said, "Habit is the great deadener."
If we really want a creative precinct in the city, it must allow for flow. It must respect the course that creativity will take. It must not evaporate the creativity with a barrage of rational parameters. That is not to say there must be no parameters. Formlessness leads to a different kind of waste. It must not let the creativity stagnate. It must encourage activity, change and development. And finally, it must not dam the creativity. Habit and expectation, patterns and forms to fill out will pull it up and stop it moving.
Vibrant. I mean, vibrant is actually quite an ugly word, really. It's highly coloured and a bit too flashy, like the advertisement it so resembles. So let's change that to the word vital, which can mean essential, but it also points to life, vita, la vie.
And sustainable?
Well, sustainable seems to be on the end of everything these days as we push the planet to its limits, which, of course, is further evidence of humanity's irrepressible, unfettered creativity and the destructive side of that energy. But sustainable is one of the key parameters of the future. It's all about ensuring that we find ways to work within a range that is not unnecessarily wasteful, that is thoughtful and considerate to the environment and the impact on the planet. It's considerate of, everyone all together, life. There we go, that word again.
So life, in all its gory beatingness, is a big part of how this precinct should be defined and come into being. The conditions for life, the life of the mind, the heart, and of course, daily life, organic life. Speaking of organic, let's talk psychogeography. We'll start at the edges of the ideas and the assumptions that are made by psychogeography and work our way towards the middle. It might help invigorate the inevitable blandness of public policy.
Well, what is psychogeography, darling?
Good question. Guy Debord defined it as the study of the precise laws and specific effects of the geographical environment, consciously organised or not, on the emotions and behaviour of individuals. To the situationists, who coined the term, the enemy in the above quote was the bourgeoisie and all the bourgeois of civil obedience. The curfew was not just military or legal. The geometry, exclamation mark, was the built environment, the city. The city as a capitalist tool for the exploitation of labour and the maximisation of profit. Not the city of our dreams and hopes and best possible endeavours. Not the city of Sydney, we pray. The call to action of psychogeography is to find ways to challenge your city and experience it outside the predicted, preordained patterns. The future push is to find a way for a city to be made that does not delineate art from function, but is a constantly unravelling experience like a dream. The chance of such an outcome for Barangaroo and beyond is now, so all the more reason to talk about what could be if we were to let it be. One of the methods that psychogeographers use to truly encounter the city is called a derive, which is basically a walk without purpose, where you follow your nose and listen to what the geography and the vibe tells you. Derive may well be the 21st century's equivalent to bird watching. A city's health may be judged by the range and variety of the derives that it stimulates. We took a derive down and around Hickson Road and the rocks. First impressions are the sheer sandstone that presses you away from the city and back to the sea. The sea edge is heavily colonised by the grey and brick facades of an industry that has passed retirement and now lies inert on the still waters of the harbour in a pre-death coma, industrial stasis. Further on, a sheer concrete platform that is as empty as a Catholic church on Sunday and as architecturally devoid of spirituality, all fenced with the cyclone wire of the detainment of something, some mound of anxiety crushed beneath the feet of all those trampling pilgrims. Detainment of the unwanted. And what do you do when you don't know what to do with something? Miller's Point is that cupboard where you put the old instruction manuals and the broken handles of the teapots and the super glue. The shed of Sydney. Men feel strangely at peace here. Perhaps we need to paint shadows for tools on the tall sandstone cliffs so we know where to hang the hammer and rest the hacksaw. Maybe we'd bury the hatchet in the reclaimed parklands, remodelled contaminated soil to cleverly simulate the foreshore before the white man and his stinking, contaminating gas factories. In its white recorded history, the area has no single name of any permanence. It has shifted identity a number of times, quite radically. Cockle Bay, in the first mapping, it was a faltering place with no real purpose or attraction. Then came the mills, hence Millers Point. With the mills came the workers and the homeowners, and for a while it had a little pocket of variety. Then came the gasworks and the Argyle Cut, which allowed traffic to flow easily from the rocks to work at the increasing number of wharves. The wharves boomed and busted their way through the last 30 years of the 19th century and into the first 30 years of the 20th. It became a distinctly, proudly working-class suburb, right there on the harbour's edge. In the Depression, it got the double whammy. The harbour bridge cut it back off from the city, and the economy abandoned it to uber exploitation. This is when it earned its next identity, the Hungry Mile. Ernest Anthony, the wharfy poet and working man of the age, wrote a poem about it. It was men, mostly, pacing anxiously between the rock and the hard place, the sheer sandstone and the deep, bottomless harbour, the hungry belly and the humiliation of desperation and powerlessness. Abandoned by the rest of the city that clawed desperately at the bourgeois hopes and heights of the North Shore, the blinkered aspirants spent the futuristic 50s and the swinging 60s commuting across its breaking back as it fell into disrepair, and some thick-fingered 1970s concrete developer decided to dump a few monolithic slabs down there in a half-hearted attempt to up its productivity by lowering its beauty. Kind of pimp mentality. Probably was an upgraded pimp with a concrete truck who crawled out of and back into the cross to exploit the edge of the waiting city and her abandoned little sister. So it was at the beginning of the 80s, decade of reinvention, that the old whore found herself the object of desire for a tangle of theatre queens looking for a home. Oh, happy days. Now they want to call a bit of it Barangaroo, companion to Bennelong, a rose by any other name will smell as sweet. The whole stretch has a history of shifting identity, struggle, neglected beauty, undervaluation. True to psychogeography, it is a little bit of Sydney's history in miniature, distinct unto itself, but distinctly of Sydney.
So why has it been neglected, and what is it about Sydney that undervalues?
Why has Sydney got such bad transport?
Anyone? In the Sydney Theatre Company's early years, it operated out of various rented premises around the city: administration, rehearsal rooms, wardrobe and workshops in Potts Point and Scenic Art and Glebe, producing about 38 productions in 5 separate theatres. It was decided to find one location that could house all the activities of the company and a theatre. It was a brilliant plan. And after an extensive search, the then derelict Walsh Bay Wharf, Pier 45, was proposed as the new home. And after more than 3 years of obstacles, budgetary and bureaucratic, overcome, the wharf's transformation was begun in 1983. The 60-year-old ironbark timber wharf warehouse, built to load cargo onto ships and tied up alongside, was converted into premises suitable for creating, producing, performing and enjoying theatre without sacrificing any of its historical integrity or context. In 1985, Vivian Fraser, in association with the New South Wales Government architect J.W. Thompson, won the Sir John Sulman Medal awarded by the Royal Australian Institute of Architects, New South Wales chapter. And the wharf conversion, when they were judging it, the jury citation includes, "Wisely, Fraser elected to regard his new work as simply another layering of the old building's history. This means that he did nothing to obscure the visual integrity of the wharf." So soon other performing arts companies and organisations got interested and gravitated to the area, and now Sydney Dance Company, Ozdance, the Sydney Philharmonia Choirs, Gondwana Choirs, Sydney Children's Choir, a lot of music down there, the Song Company, Australia Theatre for Young People, Regional Arts, Accessible Arts, Bangarra Dance Company all enjoy premises on Pier 45. It's an absolute hothouse. And 25 years later, and the wharf was presented the 25-year award for enduring architecture by the Institute. And in the jury's opinion, the wharf remains an international benchmark for this type of architectural project. It represents a skillful blend of sound urban design, conservation, adaptive reuse, and contemporary architecture, and as a consequence, is an essential aspect of Sydney's urban culture. Now, from this you can see that the theatre company's home building is not only best practice, but it's at the very leading edge of reinvigoration of the whole area to an international standard. We should also note that the actual physical structure of the company at the wharf, and we think the implications of that structure, offers a real insight in how one could best create an open plan for an arts precinct.
But perhaps we'll save that bit for later.
Okay.
For now, let's look at some other arts precincts. Two spring to mind here in Australia, which both offer a stimulus to Sydney on the one hand, you know, a bit of competitive edge, and a warning on the other, so we can win. Let's start with the stimulus. In the last 10 or 15 years, it must be true to say that both Melbourne and Brisbane have raced ahead in the arts and the invigoration of their city centres with arts-related content. In saying ahead, we do not mean that they have raced ahead of Sydney necessarily, because finally, scaling superiority in the arts is, like many acts of comparison, odious, certainly, but fatuous most pertinently. Quality of life is a difficult enough thing to define, let alone measure. But it can definitely be said that both Brisbane and Melbourne have upped their commitment, their focus, and their game when it comes to injecting arts and culture into their city identity. They really are responsible to their mantle as capital cities of big important states in a significant country in the global economy. Sydney has rested on her laurels a bit, and it is beginning to show. More importantly, it is beginning to feel like that. When you walk along the rivers in either Melbourne or Brisbane, there is a palpable pride in their precincts and an ambition, a looking forward, a promise of more, a search and a push. When a city instills these feelings in its inhabitants and its visitors, it fills them with excitement and drive. Art asks you to look around, to contemplate and to assess the world. It is stimulating even when you don't like it. At times, Sydney can feel disinterested, bored, smug, lacking in direction. At times, you can feel the post-Olympic quandary. This is understandable and not a permanent thing. We know well that when you finish doing a show, you often get quite sick and a little bit blue. It's an inherent part of the process of making and doing and showing and finally letting go of the thing that had you in its grasp. Perhaps Sydney is still coming out of these post-show blues, and it's time to get on to the next adventure. Without wanting to pull anyone's chain, we feel the challenges, the questions being asked of Sydney by the current Council of the City through Sustainable Sydney 2030 are bloody good ones. It's a great project that may well see Sydney occupied again, striving, pushing for the next 20 years. And the outcome of all that effort, we believe, will place Sydney at the very forefront of world cities in the future. So to the warning offered to us by some who know well the arts precincts of Brisbane and Melbourne. The lesson we can learn is very simple. Both feel manufactured. They feel planned and deliberated. They consequently have a self-consciousness which can make them ever so slightly distant, remote from life sometimes rather than pulsing with it. Could it be that a factor in this is that people don't really live there and the facilities seem targeted more at a tourist experience rather than the daily life of the place itself? The best precincts need to feel lived in by locals and alive with the life of the city. You need to be able to encounter the city itself, not just the public face.
When we lived in London, it's your turn to hold the water.
Yeah.
The last couple of pieces of the South Bank puzzle were put into place. The Royal Festival Hall was renovated and reinvigorated with a broader sense of purpose and a broader mandate in terms of reaching out to an audience. And also the Tate Modern opened in an old Bankside power station. It too had a broad mandate and a distinctive sense of purpose, best encapsulated, I think, by its great vast belly, the Turbine Hall, being given over to a new artist each year with the brief that the artist would fill it with a large-scale installation that the public could interface with for free. So what can we learn from that fabulous bit of precinct building? Well, free art never goes astray, for starters, and certainly people live and work in and all around that strip of the river, and there's a critical mass of institutions that tip an area from being a place to go, maybe, to being a buzzing precinct that has its own micro-vibe inside the city that you must experience. Now, obviously, the West End and Broadway must be looked at as well, and they're by far the most organically formed of all the precincts so far discussed. And this gives them a broad demographic, a sense of reputation, history, colour. People live and work all through these areas and always have. Indeed, they're so full of corner grocers and newsagent and places and folks who couldn't give a damn about theatre and the arts. And the upshot is that all types and stripes and reasons for wandering through that place are enabled to coexist and give that much-needed zing to the street. In Beijing, there is a whole area that's been colonised by the visual arts. 798 is a couple of huge city blocks that have been were converted military factories, and they've all been made into galleries, shops, studios, and in some cases living quarters for artists. It kind of began organically when the artists just gravitated there and sort of took over, as artists often do. But it's, over the last few years, it's taken on a more conscious identity and is now recognised and supported by the city. By maintaining its work-life balance, it has not become a sterile tourist trap, but is in fact a vital creative workplace for artists which anyone can visit and get the vibe.
Does anyone remember the Trades Union Club? Sydney, in the 80s, was a city characterised, I think, predominantly, certainly for young folk, as I was back then. Sydney really was characterised for me as a place of live music. Every pub seemed to have gigs on and everyone was trying to make music. Not just music, but comedy and poetry and the very weirdest edges of performance. The Sydney Front. The Sydney Front, for God's sakes, perhaps epitomised the real adventure and risk-taking, and more to our point, that sense of an organic precinct that erupted around Surrey Hills and Oxford Street and down into Redfern and Newtown. All places where people lived and worked and got on with their life. As a young adventurer from the suburbs, town was the centre. It was the magnetic attractor. It was freedom and the chance to invent and create and witness other creations. The suburbs were flat and dry and filled with sinister silence underneath the crickets and the sprinklers. The city was loud and crowded and dangerous. It was everything. It is vital for the sanity of the children of the suburbs that capital cities act like capital cities. But the main point of that music-fuelled precinct, pubs and live music in Sydney have been killed by pokies, stone dead. Gentrification of many of the suburbs I just mentioned has made it less possible for the variety of demographic and the vitality of the retail to remain as sparky, quirky and forgiving. Gentrification is a double-edged sword and is a shadow product, the self-destruction of diversity, an obstacle which cities must have strategies to counter and overcome.
So let's think now more broadly about cultural precincts. Pretty much every city that we've visited has a Chinatown. I mean, even Beijing has the Hutons. And more often than not, they're the most vibrant parts of the city, or certainly they're worth a visit. Once again, it's all down to the way that they began. They're alive, they're organic, because people were there living, working and doing their thing, and in and around and all on top of one another. It's about a microclimate. And clearly, it's able to be made because the Chinatowns that we have visited all have more in common with each other than with the city that they're actually part of. And we're not that we're advocating in any way for ghettoisation. We're talking actually about microclimates, the gathering together, the coming together of like minds and finding a way of that being encouraged and made possible down along Hickson Road. The biggest arts precinct in the world surely must be Berlin. The whole city, all two of them, has a central identity based around culture, arts and the dialogue of humanity with its destiny. A couple of major initiatives foster this perception for the city. Cheap tickets, access and entry prices are central, of course. The breadth of potential experiences is encouraged by a vast array of spaces being engaged with, not just specifically designed buildings, but reclaimed factories, schools and various other places. This adaptive reuse is vital to the identity of the city and to the triggering of the imagination of the artists and practitioners. It goes without saying that Berlin is a very exciting and engaging city and high on the list of desired world cities in which to live, and certainly to visit. This citywide precinct is epitomised perhaps in a genius initiative by the city called the Long Night of the Theatre, which sees all the performing arts companies getting together and coordinating a program of excerpts from their key works. And a series of buses travel around the city, and you get on and off, about €10 at various venues that interest you, and experience a taster of their work and their particular vibe. It stretches way into the wee hours, and it's an amazing way to encounter the city, both as a tourist and for the locals. But interestingly, it turns out that most of the punters on the long night are in fact Berliners. There are some key points to be made from all this, ranging from what place does art have in a city, and how best to foster and invigorate it. Key lessons seem to us to be the need for a precinct to evolve organically and with an authentic connection to its community and to its history, with an authentic connection to the day-to-day living and with as broad a demographic living and working within it as possible. It probably needs a happy accident, like all good cultural product. It probably needs a little bit of benign neglect, like all good parenting. But it can be accommodated by the authorities rather than legislated into a box. It can be fostered rather than planned, seems to be the key message to be taken from all of these precincts.
One of the first things we attended as artistic directors of the STC was the forum Clover was talking about, held by the City of Sydney, for what must have been a couple of hundred representatives of interested parties in the city. We had our axe to grind, which was that the emergence of the Harbourside Arts Precinct must be handled with care and with foresight. It could also be sped up with a few key transport issues addressed, quite frankly. By lunch, we were both very excited to see the ideas for linking the various cultural precincts that are potentially to be found in Sydney, and excited by someone else having identified with us the potential ribbon which could be drawn from Barangaroo to the Opera House and beyond.
And as we said earlier, the wharf offers much guidance for the further development of the area. It has all the workings of a company, accompanied by world standards. It's highly productive, if we say so ourselves, in terms of both quality and quantity. And all those workings are housed in this old wharf. Props, costumes, sound, lighting, set construction, scenic art, rehearsals, administration, box office, archives, and 2 of our 4 theatres. And all of this exists in a long, unbroken chain. And this is great for efficiency, for morale, for company identity and quality. It is vital. It's vital for our audiences, many of whom realise in taking the long walk just how much work and focus and genuine blood, sweat and tears that go into making the shows possible. But most importantly, it is vital for the quality of the microclimate on both levels of the wharf, because we only occupy the top. It's vital that this is a place where people really work and they really make and create. This is not just a place where we show our product, but it's actually where we do what we do to make the theatre happen. Like all organic precincts that we've talked about, that sense of working and making and nearly living amongst it is central to the creativity and the vitality of the area. The wharf demonstrates in its very daily existence that the precinct could be a vibrant workplace that makes great creative product, but it's not just a slick, soulless showcase. The whole area can be infused with real work and real creativity.
It was extremely exciting news for the city when the state government announced last year that the underutilised Pier 2-3 will join us as another working wharf in the near future. With Bell Shakespeare there doing their thing and ATYP making their shows and perhaps even the OCO and the Biennale, it will be doubly vibrant. We are vibrant. It does have a place. A doubly vibrant and trebly creative place. People will come to visit not just for the shows, but for the sense of community and engagement that will be more apparent, even if it's just for a sandwich by the harbour or a bit of lunchtime shopping. Vital to all this working is that we learn from the other precincts that have evolved or been planned. Not all planning is bad. Good planning is good. And make the room for the growth. Encourage the working wharf, not just the showcases, the theatres and the product-oriented aspect of our work, but the possibility of full engagement with the daily work at the heart of all our endeavours. In keeping with these ideas, we've made a few initiatives whilst we've been at the company.
Open Day is a free day that we have every second year. We started it in 2008 with just the Sydney Theatre Company doing it. We had about 5,000 people through the doors between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. to see behind the scenes at the company. And last year, 2010, the whole mob, all of the companies down on the pier, the restaurants and the cafes got on board, and about 8,000 people got a chance to experience the many artists and their range of work for free. And early in our tenure, we had an initiative which we called 20 for 20. This was an allocation of 20 tickets for every performance at $20 on the day. And they sold really well, and people, we felt, they felt more inclined, I think, to take a risk on the content and form when the cost burden was not so high. And we're still, of course, searching for a way to continue this initiative.
The identity of the company and the range of its capacity, we have an education arm, we do a lot of developmental, experimental work, and we have a main stage arm. We're all a bit mashed up when we came in, and we've really strived for segmentation and clarity between entertainment and experimentation. Both entertainment and experimentation are vital for theatre's relevance and continued growth. Audience engagement with both ends of that work is also vital to the precinct's identity as a genuine arts place, not just a slick showcase. In keeping with the breadth of experience that we can offer, being an important contributor to the area's vitality, we've introduced free climate change discussions led by the Wentworth Group of Concerned Scientists, late night free Friday night music at the Wharf sessions, ST Cinema, as well as programming diverse events at the Sydney Theatre, and it's particularly vibrant when the Writers' Festival takes over down there. Also in the spirit of bringing as much of the theatre community together as possible, we have engaged in a number of co-pros and associations with fellow national and Sydney companies.
Last year, we made significant strides with our long-term project of greening the wharf, including an installation of 1,906 state-of-the-art photovoltaic panels made possible through the donation by the Sher Foundation and collaboration with the University of New South Wales on the heritage-listed wharf. It's the second largest rooftop solar installation in Australia and the biggest on a building in Sydney. And we hope it's something that Sydney can be proud of. With the company fully aware of the savings in electricity that can be made with best practice, we had already reduced our daily consumption by about 10%. And together with the panels, we will be delivering approximately 70% of the Sydney Theatre Company's required electricity. And given how intensively theatre chews up electricity, we think that's something. And work is now about to commence on the innovative rainwater harvesting and reticulation system that will collect and store runoff in a brilliantly engineered storing device under the wharf. The water harvested will supply 100% of all non-potable water needs for the whole building, so for all the stakeholders. The company practices have been greened over the last 3 years, and two of the most important initiatives have been driven from within the company. Our head of set construction, James Mackay, has researched and initiated a system of resourcing renewable timbers, and that knowledge can now be shared with other companies. And our head of lighting, Graham Henstock, has been investigating new lighting technologies. And our Wharf 2 Theatre, the most experimental space, has now been rigged out with state-of-the-art low-voltage lighting fixtures. And both these and other practical initiatives were well showcased at the Open Day last year.
But what has any of the greening activity got to do with fostering a cultural culture?
Well, we feel that cultural institutions such as the Sydney Theatre Company, large flagship organisations in an international city, must engage the audience in a complete way as possible. The experience can't just be about the shows we put on, although of course that is central to the endeavour, but it must be about the whole encounter with the company. The environment, the ideas, and of course with the other audience members. And climate change is one of the biggest challenges facing the human race today, and it's our understanding that the reasons for it coming into being in the first place, possibly, and its rapid acceleration, certainly, as a byproduct of wasted energy and resources in the race to industrialisation, it is our feeling that those triggering reasons go to the very heart and state of our culture and civilisation today. Issues of waste and disrespect, reuse and reinvention versus the new, always the new. Prosperity and progress, at what cost? The immediate material satisfaction regardless of the chain of connection that we have to each other, the past and the planet, just to name a few.
In order to grapple with climate change and all that it means and calls into question profoundly and effectively, we must engage not just in material solutions and legislation, but in the vital organic cultural fabric that binds us and helps us make sense. The arts have always been a great public forum for the exploration of fundamental human issues and challenges. It is inherently formed in dialogue between conflicting viewpoints, between audience and artists, and indeed between individual audience members. The best drama is located not just in the heart of the characters, but in the heart of the times in which they are written. The very heart of creative thinking in human endeavour at the moment can be found in science and technology. The harnessing of solar power and other renewable sources of energy is at the forefront of physics and chemistry. It is also vital research for the energies of the future. We feel that the marriage, the burgeoning arts precinct of Walsh Bay can propose between science and the arts, between the modern and the heritage, between the material and the aesthetic, can and should stimulate and engage audiences and our city on many levels.
In fact, the intersection between science and the arts could see the Walsh Bay precinct become the first green precinct in the world.
So what's vital before anything can change?
Transport.
Bit of licensing around the area needs to be freed up somewhat so that little nooks and crannies can become alive with possibility, fuelled by a bit of alcohol.
Served responsibly, of course.
And most maddening of all these changes is event recognition. Last year, our company hosted Steppenwolf Theatre Company in the city for 5 weeks. The stature of this company and the show that they had made, the multiple Tony Award-winning August Osage County, is an international event. Or closer to home, the cast of Uncle Vanya, John Bell, Hugo Weaving, Richard Roxburgh, Jackie Weaver and so on, directed by Thomas Usher, one of the great living Chekhov interpreters. This is an event for any city, but for Sydney, their hometown. Aside from the Sydney Theatre Company, when Richard Tognetti plays overseas, this is considered an important cultural event. It should be no less so in the ACO's hometown. When the SSO is conducted by Vladimir Ashkenazi, this is a significant world cultural event. Bangarra play all around the world to great acclaim. Their home is here, in this precinct. You can visit this world-class act's studios at open day and do free workshops with them. The Australian Ballet and the Sydney Dance Company receive standing ovations. Pride is a great stimulus to ambition, aspiration and engagement. Not arrogance, not smugness, but there is so much here already for Sydney to be proud of, and yet, as events go, they pass almost without notice. This, I hazard to suggest, would not happen in Melbourne, and certainly not in many other great cities of the world. It's all very well to hide your light under a bushel, but it's a dreadful waste of energy, and what do you have when it's gone? Not even nostalgia. At least we can remember the Trade Union Club.
But enough of the past. Let's consider some strategies in the lead up to Barangaroo. Now, all great cultural precincts have that wonderful feeling of being lived in. Eclectic boutiques, markets, some sort of food fair of some kind might add to that feeling down along Hickson Road.
Rent, rent, rent. More contentious than that might be some kind of zoning, different licensing, assisted rent for studio space. I don't know how New York City caps its rents, but it does. Some kind of dispensation to avoid or dampen all the DA costs when adapting new spaces. Can cost, I think it can cost the Writers' Festival $45,000 a pop just to get into Pier 2-3. Or even better, a sensible way to get round the Uber OH&S controls. When we adapt Wharf 2 or Wharf 1, we have to go through this crazy fire sprinkler system check, even though it's already been done, it's already been tested, and it's already been approved for a production a year ago.
But more contentious still, the Sydney Theatre, which is located down the road from the wharf along Hickson Road and the site of the old Bond stores and is managed by the Sydney Theatre Company, was built in 2004 as a gift, a payback to the city for the developers of the Pier Apartments, Transfield and Mirvac. It's a beautiful theatre. It's worth about $30 million. So what if one of the Barangaroo community initiatives was an investment, a cultural investment, to be managed by all the arts companies down in Walsh Bay with the mandate that a cheap or preferably free series of cultural events or single event would happen each year. It brings the companies together. It gives a real push for art form, cross-form development and an opportunity to reach a broader audience. Well, it would soon be a world event given the pedigree of all the companies down there. And we think the potential that that offers is more inspiring than yet another venue. We have buildings, they're in Hickson Road, and what we need now is the elbow room to develop exciting content for the city.
Oh, both, of course. Underlying all this, it needs to be sustainable. It needs to be sustainable. Sustainable is not an afterthought, it is the foundation of the change, and a change which could see Sydney host the first green precinct in the world.
Made most likely by people-friendly, everyone, transport.
Finally, what can psychogeography teach us?
Well, creativity is inevitable. Encourage it. Don't police it to death. Don't plan it to death. Don't DA it to death. All forms of creative evaporation.
History is alive. Embrace, don't deny. Encourage the bridges between the city and the area and the different companies in the area.
And flow, change and flow, remembering that stagnation and containment are the other enemies of creativity.
Historical obstacles of the psychogeography of the area all contribute to it seeming distant from the city, dangerous but not exciting, remote and difficult. What are those historical psychogeographic problems? Well, the bubonic plague was there. There was the Hungry Mile. There's been murders, parking inspectors, Patrick's Union busting, transport, weird housing history, industrial chemicals, Harbour Bridge breaking the flow of the traffic, overpriced apartments, private moorings, struggle.
Yes, they are real challenges, the bubonic plague. But the past can be allowed to express its beauty. There needs to be a revitalisation so that the area can live again. Phoenix-like, it can rise sustainably from the ashes, and the whole city can be proud of all of the things, great or otherwise, that go on down there in and amongst these working wharves.
Thanks for listening. We hope there's something in there for the panel discussion.
Thank you.